Welcome to SureCloud's monthly cyber threat briefing. So my name's Craig Moores. So I'm responsible for the risk advisory practice here at SureCloud. I'm joined by Hugh today. Hugh's one of our cybersecurity consultants. And we've got quite an interesting topic, certainly from my perspective, because it's a conversation I tend to have quite a lot at home, which is around sort of security related to wearable technology. And from my perspective, I guess everybody thinks about, maybe back to the news articles where Google Glass was kind of a big topic for a little while and the privacy implications of it. But also, thinking about things like Apple Watches and Fitbits and, there's been a number of breaches around platforms like Strava. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion today, I guess, around wearable technology. I guess my first question, which is the most obvious one for you, Hugh, is how secure is wearable technology? We go out to stores, we buy our Apple Watches, we pair them to our phones. What's actual? How actually secure are they?
I think that's a really good question, Craig, and it'll be such a varied answer, really, because you've got your big players in the space like Apple and Fitbit, where the device is, they connect to a mobile phone or another device, and they're generally pretty good. They've got the ability to link with that other device, and then that sort of hub device, then normally the phone can handle all the encryption and the data security elements of it. But you've also got these devices from smaller players that you might just be able to pick up online from sort of no brand or relatively unknown brands that operate independently. And this is where we've got these concerns, because these devices that sit on your wrist, they're small, they're lightweight, they're made to a price point, and their ability to handle encryption with their very small processing chips, they just can't do it. So that data is then it's leaving that device, right, because it needs to be ingested somewhere for you to view. And so that's happening in the clear, and we don't know necessarily how great these other players in the market are with their security. And it's a heck of a lot of data that these things can track.
Yeah, I think that's the key topic that we're normally discussing is the volume of data, but also the sensitivity. I replaced my Apple Watch earlier this year, and mine can track my heart rate. Although Apple obviously make several statements about the fact that it can't detect heart attacks and things like that. But to get to that volume of data, to be able to start to trend and really track what's going on with your body through, as you said, what is a really small piece of technology. There's some real data concerns, aren't there, around sort of the amount of information that's processed and the potential sensitivity of what it could tell people about you.
Yeah, I think especially when you consider the fact that most of these devices, they've got a microphone on them that's always listening as well, right on your wrist. That's never leaving your side. I think there could be real consequences if these were compromised, both from an invasion of privacy, sort of personal data security viewpoint, but also think you in the conversations you have on a daily basis. There's probably enough in there for a threat actor to potentially glean that and start looking at things like identity.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, we focus very much, I guess, there as a starting point. There are obviously quite a lot of sort of news articles around when Google got its Glass technology out, and the potential privacy concerns around that. And I guess I don't want to go too near that because I'm more interested in the security. But what about the positives about wearables? Obviously, there are lots of medical devices these days that are wearable technologies that have a real positive thing. How are organizations that are manufacturing and supporting them, how are they securing those?
Yeah, so and that's another really good point. So I'm a type 1 diabetic. I use a wearable glucose sensor myself, and these devices, they're great for people with medical conditions. Pacemakers and the like come to mind. They're hugely beneficial. We're miles ahead in terms of our technology now than we were a few years ago. But again, with these things, they are they're almost always designed with their primary function in mind, and security is inevitably an afterthought. And with these things being on your skin, potentially in you, as the technology progresses, that could be a real problem if an internal device were to be compromised, again due to the fact that it's small and it just doesn't have the processing power to handle modern encryption standards and that sort of thing. It could be potentially catastrophic.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I wasn't aware that you had a wearable, but I think I'd read a lot, certainly, and we have them within the family where people have had pacemakers fitted. And I remember not all that long ago, probably sort of thinking back, maybe up to 12 months ago now, there was a large recall, wasn't there, on a batch of pacemakers that were inherently insecure. I mean, thinking about the potential for what a threat actor could do to a device that's controlling kind of your heart is scary. I mean, what sort of things outside of encryption would sort of manufacturers be thinking about for kind of protecting that? I mean, I assume that they don't have a lot of on-device storage, so they must be in constant communication with other devices in order to obviously protect themselves. I mean, how do organizations keep those types of things up to date?
Yeah, so it is a big concern, and most of these devices, when they're manufactured, they're built with a transmission capability. So I think a lot of things transmit just on radio frequency around sort of 400 megahertz, but they're only able to transmit. So there's very limited capability to send new firmware or patches or fixes to these devices, because all they know is sending that data. And yeah, it's generally not encrypted. It's obviously it's encoded using a decent sort of encoding algorithm that's proprietary typically, but that can be reverse engineered. And even if it is encoded, it still doesn't do anything against replay attacks and that sort of thing, because there's no sort of one-time like a nonce or anything like that in it. It just doesn't have that capability typically. So a lot of that sort of stuff is a really big concern.
Yeah, we've just had a question around data again, and who really owns it. I think that's a really valid point. I mean, I know. If I go back to the Apple Watch example, because I'm quite careful when I read through things before I sign up for them. But when I was reading there, Apple take quite a lot of responsibility for data that they need in order to kind of tailor their services and the way that they deliver those to me as a consumer. I actually have to give quite a lot of my data away by agreeing to use these things. And I guess that model is very different for people that rely on it for a medical condition. So, who really does own the data when we're using devices like these?
I think ultimately in a country like the UK, where we've got the GDPR, we do own our data. But as you said, when you sign up, there's a whole host of different organizations, especially when you start thinking about third-party integrations, like if you've got a sleep tracker or something that isn't Apple. Every single one of these apps, which you might have only installed to use on your phone, but then it ports across to your watch as well, that then just allows, that's another third party that then has your data, probably part of a master terms of service agreement, which undoubtedly you don't remember. And so, potentially with each app you've got, that's a whole nother data controller, data processor that's got access to your data, and it's just blind trust, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is volume, isn't it? And the number of interdependencies. I know. Again, thinking back not too long ago, Strava had a problem with kind of a lot of its data going public that it's collecting for, mapping running routes and cycling routes. And, that's all sort of combined with information that can be found, about individuals online. That's gold dust to a threat actor, isn't it? I mean, looking at piecing those things together, looking at weaknesses, that's ultimately going to give them a really good starting point for attacking, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of these apps, like Strava, you mentioned, they're built as a fundamentally social application. So it's not just that one organization you're sharing your data with. The whole point of that is to put it out there for anyone to access it. And like you rightly said, a few years ago, I think it was 2018, there was the incident where people were just able to look at Strava and build up these heat maps, and you could really easily spot the outline of a US military base in the Middle East, where the US Army provisioned Fitbits to their troops, and then they used them, and you can just log on to the website and see all this publicly shared data, and that's pretty valuable to someone that wants to do some harm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the answer to that question really is, we'd like to think that we're still in control of that data, by the kind of legislative and regulatory requirements, as you pointed out, that we have within the UK. But, ultimately that data has to go to lots of other places in order for the service to perform as kind of indicated, really. So I think whilst we would still say that we own the data, we've got to agree to share that to lots of other third parties in order to get the best out of the services that we're being targeted with. So data is a really good question, but I guess what security requirements could people look at? I mean, I must admit I haven't looked in any great detail at what I could do to restrict things, transposing themselves onto my Apple Watch. I guess if an app's capable, it will just do it out of the box. Is that right?
Yeah, I think in the majority of cases, I know Apple recently implemented an additional control so that when an application asks for permission to use different sensors and gather data from them, you now have to periodically refresh that permission. And so, if you're expecting your watch to be just measuring your heart rate or something like that, but in its permissions list, it also seems to constantly be accessing your microphone. Well, that's something to review. Why would it need the microphone to just monitor that other sensor? And so, we're getting more fine-grained controls over these permissions and what we do and don't allow. And I think that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think it is, but users inherently are not really thinking about security, are they, when they buy a device from a well-known manufacturer? And I think we could probably have some comfort that's sort of justified. But you pointed out quite rightly the kind of cheaper models, or those that are manufactured overseas and come through channels like sort of eBay and other kind of third-party auction sites. I mean, what do people do with those? Do they just accept the risk that ultimately their information may not be as secure as it is with a bigger player, or are there things that they can consider, with permissions on their own devices to stop them from doing things that they don't want?
Yeah, I think depending on what the device is and where it's connecting back to, I think I'd feel a lot more comfortable with something that connected to my PC or my phone, where I then had that decent level of assurance that from that point out the data was reasonably well looked after, rather than a device that just connects straight to my Wi-Fi network, where I've got no sort of intermediary step that I can stop and review the controls. And I think you're right, really, in that with these devices that are at these built to these price points, where we have that little assurance, if you're going to use those, it's sort of a risk decision that we're going to have to each individually take, I think.
So you used the example about military earlier, but I'll give you another example that's kind of a little bit closer to home for me. So my daughter, when we went away in the summer, we bought her a tile that we could join to her bag, so that they work on Bluetooth. They're obviously operating at kind of up to 300 meters. But I mean, again, I looked in the app and I turned off the things that I thought were appropriate, but I couldn't find much guidance online around what was really what was secure and what was not secure. I mean, what's your view on things like that when we're thinking about safety? Because I thought it was maybe a little bit contentious. My wife thought it was a really good idea. I won't say that we discussed it at length, but we ended up getting the tile because that's what my wife wanted. But what's your thoughts on things like that when we're thinking about safety?
I think it's probably the perfect example of a double-edged sword, really, isn't it? We've got that assurance. We can. It's brilliant to be able to track where our vulnerable relatives are, or even put one on your key ring and have that. But with that comes the ability for someone to stick it on the underside of a police car or something like that. And especially these small ones, that you mentioned, the tile, the new Apple AirTags that are really good with their location accuracy, because they use any other Apple device in the vicinity for which in the Western world that there's no shortage of. That you get incredibly accurate location data from that, and they're so small that they're really easy to conceal.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think there's a lot to think about when sort of technology is moving on so fast. We just had another question around around data as well, and the question is more focused at whether that data can be sold onwards to other companies. And I think you'd probably be looking through the terms and conditions at this point, wouldn't you, as to the relationships between their sort of controllers and sub-processors around sort of what their agreements are. But I mean, in terms of it being sold, I'm not aware that most would. The example is focused at a particular company, but I think any company would have to give you sort of reasonable knowledge of what they intend to do with your data before ultimately you press the button to say that you agree to it. What should people be looking out for with regards to kind of onward use of their data? Is there anything else that they can be doing to kind of prevent that going any further?
Yeah, so any big platform should really have a section within the preferences on how they're managing your data. Every organization that's registered with the ICO in the UK should also have a data protection officer that should be able to answer any questions you have around how your data is used. If you take a look through the terms and conditions, I mean, a surprising number of these apps and services that run on these wearables do they'll ask you permission, but if you tick yes, then they'll gladly sell your data, normally for advertising purposes, for targeted advertising. So yeah, it is definitely something that you need to take a look at, because they'll be more than happy to sell your data, but only if you let them. So just make sure that you've got those boxes ticked in the right place.
Yeah, it's good. It's a very good point. I'm going to launch a poll because I'm interested in obviously your views on whether you've considered any security implications for wearables. So I'm going to let that run for a few minutes while we talk about maybe some of the other use cases. We've talked a little bit about positive and negative in terms of wearables. We've talked about sort of some of the implications, but we touched a little bit on real life examples. But I wonder, Hugh, whether you've got any other real life examples of where good or bad, these are sort of involved in kind of active threats or attacks.
I don't think we've seen too many examples recently of big like Apple Watch style devices being used in attacks. But I think as these devices become more ubiquitous and IoT starts to become more prevalent in the workplace as well, especially, I think it's another piece of that puzzle that's going to click in. And will certainly soon be a high target, I think.
So I've got two more questions for you, Hugh. One is around connectivity. So you've mentioned about sort of the device pairing bit, but what about where we use them? Obviously, one of the things that I noticed, obviously, that my Apple Watch does is it shares obviously Wi-Fi connections that my phone has authorized as well. So what about the security of these being connected to our home networks? What's your view on kind of how secure that is, and whether those could be used in either direction really to kind of compromise you at home?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like we said, they're really small. Their ability to do much is really limited. So any network they're connected to, be that at home or in the workplace, they are introducing it as a relatively significant risk, I think, really. Um, Especially considering, like we mentioned, their ability to send data but not necessarily receive. Obviously, you can update your Apple Watch, but a lot of these devices, it shipped in a state, and that is the state that it remains in. So as soon as someone finds any issue with these devices, if threat actors, they don't work alone. They'll operate in communities. They'll be sharing this information with each other. So as soon as someone finds an issue, they'll all know about it, and you've really got no way of fixing that bar turning it off.
Yeah, Bill made a really good point in the chat here. He expected the poll to be weighted a bit more towards sort of having considered security, and he's absolutely right. But then equally, I agree. I think in the general public, I don't think people pay enough attention to the security implications of these things. I know, most of the time, we receive things as gifts. We'll open it out, we'll start it up, we'll play with it for a little bit, and then ultimately we'll kind of forget what we've done, and we'll just get on with it. So that kind of ongoing sort of awareness, I think trying to find information about sort of how you can protect yourselves from these in the real world is pretty it is pretty good consideration. But I certainly struggle to find information about what I should be sort of allowing access to and what I shouldn't. So I'm not surprised that Bill's comment is there, and I do agree with it as well. So the poll is kind of 69% in favour of yes, Bill, in your answer, and I can share the findings of that afterwards if you're interested.
I think if you flip Bill's comment there on its head, and yes, you would expect it to be heavily skewed. As we've got an audience here of people attending a cybersecurity webinar, the fact that almost 1 in 3 of us haven't considered the implications of these wearable devices, and maybe hopefully it's the 33% of us that aren't using them, but the fact that a third of people aren't considering this, I think that is probably a more frightening thought than we might have first realized.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. And I think, maybe people are subconsciously kind of trusting third parties with, what security are being put around these devices. And, as we do with many other things, we go and join sort of friends' Wi-Fi networks, and, we'll take our laptops and our tablets around, and, we'll trust that they're securing us to a level that we're kind of happy with. But I think in this environment, you and Bill are both absolutely right. I think looking at the fact that potentially one in 3, 1 in 4 are not sort of actively thinking about that, is concerning. But equally, I think you've probably given me a lot of confidence, Hugh, that threat actors, whilst they can use this information, I think it sounds more like they will use it for social engineering, or for building up profiles of individuals or organisations, which equally is not good, but it's not directly related to the security of the wearable, and probably more so towards how the information that's processed by the wearables can be used by the threat actors. So that I think is probably a little bit more comforting. But I think it's been really interesting. I think the real life examples, some of those I hadn't considered. I think the fact that we maybe take technology for granted a little bit in terms of the trust that we put in manufacturers to obviously protect us, but equally with how secure those are. And I think as the new sort of generations of wearables come out, that we know and we've seen that they will have more processing capability, they'll have more intelligence, and they'll be able to do more than they do today. So it's definitely a subject that I think is going to be sort of pushing forwards. And people, as you rightly pointed out around IoT, as these things mature, people's maybe consideration for the security of them should mature with that as well. So I haven't got any other questions for you, Hugh. I mean, have you got anything else that you want to raise at this point, or anything you want to add to it?
I think you just touched on something really interesting in what you were saying there. Take your computer that sits in your office at home. That's connected to your network. Your wearable, it connects to your network. It connects to your office network. If you go around to your friend's house and ask to join their Wi-Fi on your phone, it's connected to their network. So it would be such a good attack vector for spreading malware or gaining access to other networks should a threat actor compromise a wearable device.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. And I guess that level of comfort you gave me 20 minutes ago has probably just disappeared on the basis that I could potentially now be infecting myself with malware just by walking around my house and around the family. But maybe in the balance of things, I haven't got anybody quite as sophisticated at home to be able to exploit it. Although with my daughter's tablet skills, I imagine she'll be understanding far more about this as time goes on than I do. But I will share the results of the poll just for interest. Have we got any more questions at this point for either Hugh or for me? No? Okay then. Well, thank you everybody. I hope you found that useful. I certainly did. Please stay tuned for next month's webinar. I will share the results just for interest, but otherwise, thank you. Have a good evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Craig.